Let's talk about the top waiver wire pickups heading into week 7. It's time to improve your rosters. I have over 40 names that we'll talk about in today's video. If you're in a smaller league or a larger league, there is something here for everyone, and I'm going to do all of it in under 20 minutes. Let's start with guys that should already be rostered. If you're in a smaller format, an 8-team or a 10-team league, these are some names that should take priority. Chase Brown is slowly taking over the RB1 role in Cincinnati. Chuba Hubbard has been a must start for multiple weeks right now. Raheem Mostert could be the starter next week if Achane's out with a concussion. Alexander Mattison is a weekly flexible option. Had a great game. 17 points in PPR leagues. Rico Dowdle is a starting running back for the Cowboys. Bucky Irving, we saw how good he can be in a featured role. Tyrone Tracy is slowly saying, "You got to start me, New York." I mean, he looks really great. And Tucker Kraft, I still believe, is a startable tight end on a weekly basis. All right, moving on from those smaller formats. The first name I'm going to talk about in today's video, I'm going to go through very quickly. Josh Downs. My question to you, if you're watching this, is how in the world is Josh Downs still available in over 50% of ESPN and Yahoo leagues? How is that possible? 3 weeks ago, we had this guy on our stash series, and for the last 2 weeks, we've had him on this waiver wire video. How is he still not rostered in the majority of ESPN and Yahoo formats? In the last 3 games, 22 points versus Pittsburgh, 16 versus Jacksonville, and just this week versus Tennessee, 9 targets, caught 7 of them, got into the end zone, almost 20 PPR points. He has been an absolute superstar with Joe Flacco at quarterback. In fact, if you look at his time with Flacco, weeks 4 to 6, 3 weeks, he has the 4th most targets in that span. He's 11th in receiving yards. He's 4th in fantasy points and 8th in fantasy points per game over 19. In that span, he's averaging more points per game than Jaden Reed, Terry McLaurin, Justin Jefferson, Stephon Diggs, Amon-Ra, and DJ Moore. If he's out there, you're missing out on a weekly flex. Pick him up. Don't overthink this, okay? All right, the next player we're going to talk about has also been featured on our stash video multiple times this week. I know it's been annoying if you've been watching that stash video, but this is why I've been telling you to pick up Pop, Douglas, and these Patriot wide receivers. This is the Drake May effect. Okay, first game that Pop Douglas has Drake May, he scores over 21 points. The first game with Drake May. That is a career best type of game. 9 targets, catches 6 of them, over 90 yards and a touchdown. He has 9 targets in 3 of the last 4 games, so you know he's going to continue to be involved. If you look at snaps and routes run, he's never going to lead the team because he's a slot receiver similar to Josh Downs. But when he's on the field, if you look at targets, they are very intentional about targeting him. He led the team in targets with 9, had a 30% target share, and this offense could be much better with Drake May going forward in the next couple weeks. From weeks 1 to 5 with Jacoby Brissett, this team was averaging 11.2 offensive points per game. In week 6 alone, Drake May's only start versus a good defense in Houston, 21 points they put up on the board, a season high. Low key, by the way, if you don't want to spend up on Pop Douglas, I would suggest adding a name like Jalen Polk or Kayshon Boutte for free as stashes. Specifically Polk, I think he's going to be much better moving forward. But if Pop Douglas is out there, I'm willing to spend about 20 to 25% of my fab to get a potential weekly flex moving forward. All right, at number 3, do you need a quarterback? Are you a quarterback needy team? Well, there are some rookie quarterbacks who are lighting it up right now. Drake May, who we just talked about, and Caleb Williams. Whichever one of these guys are available, you can definitely go ahead and consider them a weekly start as an option depending on matchups moving forward. What a year for rookie quarterbacks, right? Let's start with Drake May. In his first ever start, he had over 26 fantasy points. I mean, that's crazy. 26 fantasy points. He had multiple turnovers, and he still had 26 fantasy points. 250 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He had almost 40 rushing yards. We talked about this on the stash video. If you see here, in college, his sophomore season, almost 700 yards, 7 rushing touchdowns, had almost 10 rushing touchdowns in his last year at North Carolina. This is not some fluke. Drake May is a sneaky, athletic, not even sneaky, he's a really athletic player that has some wheels for days. So definitely, if you're looking for a quarterback, why not stash him? And then as far as Caleb Williams goes, the first 4 weeks were really rough. In the first 4 weeks, he completed 61% of his passes, had a 3 to 4 touchdown to interception ratio, and scored just 12.6 fantasy points per game. In the last 2 games, However, he's completing over 74% of his passes, has a 6-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio, and is averaging over 32 points per game. Now, to be fair, Carolina Panthers, the Jacksonville Jaguars, not the most difficult teams. Those are very good teams to play for your fantasy quarterback, but he's clearly putting a lot of things together, and some of the pieces to the puzzle are starting to make sense. If you need a starting quarterback and you just cannot find one, I'm willing to spend about 10 to 15% of my fab to see what these guys could be on a weekly basis. All right. At number 4, let's talk about some upside wide receiver adds. 2 names here in particular, Romeo Doubs and Xavier Legette. Let's start with Romeo Doubs. Doubs led the team in snaps. He had 54 out of 73, which is 74%. And he led the team in routes run. He had an 83% route participation rate. Now, here's the reality. Doubs typically leads his team in snaps already. And what you would want to see with Romeo Doubs is a higher percentage of the targets, a higher amount of targets. I mean, he was only targeted 4 times, but here's the reason that you can be optimistic about him. Number 1, he played well. He had some touchdowns. Number 2, the Packers were pretty much ahead this entire game. They didn't really need to throw the ball, so they could be in game scripts where they're going to need to throw the ball more in the future. And number 3, Dontavion Wicks and Jaden Reed both went down with injuries in this game, which could lead to Doubs getting a higher percent of the targets moving forward. All right, let's talk about Xavier Legette here. Second on the team this week in snaps, 77% of the snaps. In routes run, 78% route participation. And in targets, he was 3rd. I wish we could see a higher percentage of the targets for him, just 4 targets. But on those 4 targets, we saw 3 catches, 23 yards, and he got into the end zone, making a highlight touchdown catch. Here's my concern and why I don't want to blow my load for Xavier. Pause. All right, I'm sorry, family friendly. But the reason we don't want to go too crazy is because Bryce Young could come back at any point. All right, and I know people who have Deontay Johnson are not going to want to hear that, but ask yourself, why would you continue to start Andy Dalton? You're not winning games anyway. What is the benefit of this franchise? Be realistic. You're not making the playoffs. I know. I desperately want Andy Dalton to be the starter rest of the season too for fantasy. That is the most fun for the rest of the year. But if this team wants to see what Bryce Young has and let him develop, they're not going to win games anyway. They're not doing it with Andy Dalton. So just trying to be realistic here. These 2 names, I'd spend about 15% on my fab. All right, do you need a spot start in week 7 with some potential upside in the future? I've got 4 names for you here. Number 1 is Trey Benson. Okay, Trey Benson has been really efficient with limited opportunities. James Conner did deal with an ankle injury in week 6. We don't know the severity of it at the time of recording this video, but there is a chance that he could miss time. And if he does, and if you know that by the time you're watching this video, I'm willing to go out and make Trey Benson a priority add. Really talented player out of Florida State, tested really well. I liked his film, special athlete, and got pretty good draft capital from this team with the Arizona Cardinals. Okay, next spot start potential. Again, all these guys, if their starters are out in week 7, okay, that's where they gain value. Isaac Herendo had a huge run on Thursday Night Football, would have scored the touchdown, but wanted to play it smart and pretty much run out the clock. I don't know why the Niners decided then to give the touchdown to Kyle Juszczyk, but it is what it is. Had that huge run. I mean, we know how special of an athlete Isaac Herendo is. Had a 9.89 relative athletic score, elite composite speed grade, elite explosion grade, really, really great athlete. And Jordan Mason came in and out of the game on Thursday Night Football. Was his momentum, was it that kind of carrying him? Was it the adrenaline that was carrying him? Is he going to have an injury that's more serious now throughout the week? We see that often with names. So monitor Jordan Mason when you're doing your waiver wires. All right, let's talk about Antonio Gibson as well in this category. He was awful versus the Houston Texans. Averaged under 2 yards per carry. That's a really tough defense. But the good news is it's a short week. Thursday Night Football they play versus the Jags, and that's a great matchup versus Jacksonville. That's probably the best matchup for your running back in fantasy football. So if, and that's a big if Ramondre Stevenson misses time, Gibson's a legit startable option, especially in an offense that is looking better and better. Ty Chandler is the last name in this group. Aaron Jones has been dealing with that hip injury. If Aaron Jones misses time, you can play Ty Chandler and expect 8 to 10 fantasy points if you're in a desperate position. But of course, they play the Lions, so It's not ideal. And for these guys, you're looking to spend about 5 to 10% of your fab on them. Okay, let's talk about short-term wide receiver plays, and more specifically, the Arizona Cardinals, Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. Marvin Harrison left this game with a concussion. I can't think of a time this year where a player has left the game with a concussion and played the next week, so it feels like a guarantee he's going to miss a week. I could be wrong. And if he does, Michael Wilson led the team in snaps and in routes run, and Greg Dortch led the team in targets. So both could be optional spot starts, right? But here's the bad news. They do play the Chargers next week. Not a terrible matchup, but certainly not one that you would target in a spot start. But if you're looking to pick them up, you can spend about 5 to 10% of your fab and see what they could be in a desperate play. At 7, let's talk about Kimani Vidal, a player that was featured on my stash video this week. We really like Kimani Vidal. Look, if you look at the usage here, J.K. Dobbins dominated touches. That shouldn't really be a surprise, but he dominated opportunities. I think he had like 28 total opportunities. However, remember, this is Kimani Vidal's first ever NFL action, and at least he had a role, right? He had 15 snaps on early down scenarios, and he also played a role on third down where he had 4 snaps. And here's the reality. Gus Edwards is on the IR, and even when Gus Edwards comes back, Gus cannot offer this team what Vidal can. He just can't. He is not the pass catcher that Vidal is. He doesn't have the same juice that Vidal has. So I think we could see Vidal's role grow over the next couple weeks. I'm willing to add him as a speculative add. Think about what we were saying about Tyrone Tracy a couple weeks ago. It's kind of like a similar thing. All right, at number 8, I know you probably want me to talk about these names, so let's talk about it. The Tampa Bay backfield, Sean Tucker, Rachaad White, etc. I think a lot of people are going to be picking up Sean Tucker this week. And if you are one of those people, I would just advise you to be very smart about the amount that you spend. This could be fool's gold. So I'm only willing to spend about 5% of my fab on Sean Tucker to see what he could be. Let's talk about why. So first off, he played incredible. That is a career game. That is better than most NFL players' career games will ever be. He had 136 rushing yards, averaged almost 10 yards per carry, 2 touchdowns, was used in the air as well, looked incredible, looked exactly like the player that we thought he could be coming out of college. Here's my concern. Rachaad White will be back. He will be back at some point, and he will have a role. They're not just going to give up on Rachaad White. And we already know that Bucky Irving also has a role, a solidified role. And lastly, this team was up for the majority of the second half. So in a more neutral game script or a negative game script, will they be using Sean Tucker in the same exact light? So honestly, I got to give him his props, but I would be very hesitant to spend a high percentage of my fab on Sean Tucker. At number 9, are you in a Superflex league? Because this is an incredible ad for you guys out there. We are shooting for the moon in Superflex specifically, not one quarterback, Superflex, Spencer Rattler. The stats, they will not blow you away here in week 6, all right? Face the Tampa Bay Bucs in neutral game script. He looked really good, but then he had to start forcing it because this team was down so heavily, and it forced him to make some pretty ugly plays, some bad throws, bad ball placement. But before that scenario, he actually looked very good. He looked like he belonged in the NFL, and I believe he had that it factor, if you know what I mean. So the stats, 55% of his passes completed, almost 250 yards and a touchdown. But again, the context, if you actually watch that game, there are so many throws where you're like, damn, Derek Carr is not doing that. He can't sling the ball in like that. So there's some zip on the balls. There's some good placement. And obviously the Saints won't always give up 51 points to an opposing offense and ask him to do so much. If you're in super flex leagues, maybe this is bold, but I'd be willing to spend about 50% of my fab. And if you're in a super flex league, you know how difficult it is to get a startable, reliable quarterback with upside. And I think that's what you could have with Spencer Rattler. If Spencer Rattler continues to build on what we saw this week, I would not be surprised if he becomes this team's starter for the rest of the season, even when Derek Carr is healthy. The last name we'll talk about before we get into some honorable mentions and some streamers for defense this week is the tight ends, specifically Mark Andrews and Cade Otton. Now, look, I'm aware in most leagues, Mark Andrews is still rostered, but I have seen in a lot of leagues people dropping Mark Andrews. If you're in a league where that has happened, add him. Not because we believe in Mark Andrews, but because we want to flip him in a trade to get a reliable name. Okay, so add Mark Andrews, people will see that he scored a touchdown. They'll see he was decent last week. And then you can use Mark Andrews in a trade with another name to ideally package to upgrade at the tight end position. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If you don't want to spend up on Andrews, go out and pick up Auten for free. K. Auten, he's averaging 6.8 targets per game in the last 4 weeks. Let's move on to defensive streamers for week number 7. The Bills at the Titans. Will Levis, turnover machine. The Bengals at the Browns. Deshaun Watson, sack machine. The Colts at the Dolphins with no Tua. The Dolphins have been a great play for defenses. The Rams versus the Raiders. If they stick with Aiden O'Connell, that offense is not going to be able to move the ball. Those are all great streaming options if you don't have a solidified defense. All right, let's move on to larger league adds. If you're in a 14 to 16 team league, these are some names that you can add. And then we will also talk about Fool's Gold this week. So in larger leagues, Kayshon Boutte is definitely a name that you can add. Played a lot of snaps. Drake May is now the starting quarterback. Rashad Bateman sneakily has been a very good play if you're in like a 16-team league. He's been having some good games. Troy Franklin and Devon Vele are starting to pick up their usage in the Broncos wide receiver room. Marshawn Lloyd is coming back from injury here soon. Same with Kendre Miller. Hunter Henry was pretty decent today with Drake May. Deonta Foreman might have a chance to have a role in deeper formats with Jerome Ford having that injury. Bud Memes, maybe he has a special connection with Rattler. And then Noah Brown had 8 targets this week with the Commanders. So if you're in a larger league, those are names that you can consider adding. And then the last thing we'll talk about today is Fool's Gold. Now, I think a lot of people will talk about Gabe Davis and Dameon Pierce. Personally, my humble opinion, and I could be wrong, is that these two names are Fool's Gold. I do not want to pick up Gabe Davis. We have 5 weeks of evidence that he is not a good play with the Jaguars. You have 1 week where he caught 2 touchdowns. There will not be consistency, in my opinion. They will not prefer him over Brian Thomas in the future, over Evan Ingram, over Christian Kirk. I just don't want to do it. And as far as Dameon Pierce go, he's the clear RB2. Think about it. Would you want to pick up the RB2 on an offense that has a workhorse like Joe Mixon when in neutral game scripts, they have shown that they will use him and abuse him? I just don't think Dameon Pierce is worth the pickup. So that's all the waivers for today. I appreciate you guys for watching. A lot of detail. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did you enjoy this one? Was it informational? I hope it was. Drop a like on the video to show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. And the last thing I'll say here is if you haven't created a free account on Flock Fantasy yet, go do it. If you use a promo code LAND, you will get the expert consensus rankings, the trade calculator, and the team analyzer all for free by using the promo code LAND. And then if you check out the pinned comment, there's a link where you can ask me a question at any time. It can be waiver related, start sit, trades, etc. I appreciate you for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon. All love. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.